Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Network. Of course, this is the podcast that covers everything that's happening with the Orville and Starflight. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Starfleet. But I cannot do this without a full complement of crew, and I got an interesting crew that's joining me. But first and foremost, I've got to welcome back our ship counselor, our top-notch holographic captain, even coming up from sickbay this week because she loves to do this so much with us, the wonderful Amy Nelson.
Well, hello. What is it? Live logs and I can't remember.
That's highly illogical, Amy.
Yes.
Now, Amy, I have an issue this week because I've been assimilated. Apparently, this podcast has been assimilated finally.
Oh yes, welcome BQN.
Yeah. You are kind of the queen of the BQN, so I would like you to introduce our wonderful crew from the BQN that is so kind enough to join us for this wonderful episode of Union Federation. So there's a guy named Kevin, but it's not a Kevin I know. It's a different Kevin.
Yeah, I know. There's so many Kevins, you know.
I know. I think it's a requirement we have here at the Fandom Podcast Network. We have to have a Kevin on every podcast. I don't know.
Exactly.
But would you care to introduce this Kevin?
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah.
Last time I was here, Kyle, Kevin was here as well, and we just overwhelmed you with too many. You've only got one Kevin to deal with tonight.
First it was assimilated by Kevin's, now it's by BQN, and you know what? You're not done assimilating me because from the BQN as well, that is joining us, and does this mean I'm going to start glowing green in some places? Maybe some weird black things attached to my arms. I don't know.
Here, resistance is futile, Kyle.
That's what I figured. I might have to do a morphosis here before this episode is out. Well, guys, we are here to talk the latest episodes of Star Trek Prodigy. So before we even get talking about that, that is right. We're going to be diving deep into episodes 13 and 14 of Star Trek Prodigy. So if you have not watched the episodes, go watch the episodes, come back and join us. We're going to have a good time, a lot of fun with these two episodes of Star Trek Prodigy. However, first, we do have a little bit of interesting Star Trek news. Now, I'll be honest, I am glad I have all these representatives of the BQN here because these guys know their stuff when we're talking about Star Trek conventions. And there was some big news this past week. Star Trek Seattle, which was set in line to be the next, if I'm correct, the next official Star Trek convention has been canceled. And yet, from my understanding, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of mystery of what's exactly happened here. Other than some really bad mismanagement, perhaps. But Thad, I know you talked about this a bunch on Infinite Diversity. What can you kind of give me a rundown of just a little quick rundown of what's happened here? Because I know this has upset a lot of Star Trek fans.
Yeah. So, and the news really only broke because Alex Perry from the Weekly Trek podcast over on Tricorder Transmissions sent them an email asking for an update because we hadn't seen any update in a while. And someone responded to him saying that they had decided not to move forward with the convention, which then, of course, led to a lot of conversation on the internet. So then they had to make the official post. So kudos to Alex for getting them to admit that the convention is not happening, because otherwise it might have been months yet before we knew. And my thought on this is it's one of two things. It's either... Okay, well, there's technically a third option. One of the things that some people have pointed out is that the convention center where it's supposed to be held in Seattle is currently under construction, where they're adding an addition to it that was supposed to be done in January, but due to some union issues in Seattle, that has been way behind schedule. So it's possible that the convention is not happening because they don't have a place to put it. But my thought on that is, if that were the case, they would tell us that because they would want to be able to blame it on someone other than themselves. That's my thought anyway. The other options are that ReedPop, the company that is running the convention, is not happy with how Mission Chicago performed. They wanted to get more money from it and didn't, so they've decided not to do another one. That's possible. And in fact, I would say that was even the most likely, if not for what happened with Destination Star Trek in Germany and the UK earlier this year, where we found out that Paramount pulled the plug and no longer wants to run Destination Star Trek in Germany and UK. So at that point, Mission Seattle was the only officially licensed convention left. So that tells me, in my opinion at least, the most likely scenario here is that Paramount didn't want to be involved in a dedicated Star Trek event. When you combine that with the big panels that they do at San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con, and have big press events and get a lot of buzz for that, which is honestly more buzz than they get for their official Star Trek convention, they've decided to pull back and do those and not run their own convention. That's again, we can't say that for sure. That's just my assumption. And I will say there is still one official Star Trek event of some kind happening next year, and I will be there. It is Star Trek The Cruise in March.
So, Amy, I got to ask, what are your thoughts on this? Because I know you've been a big fan of the conventions. Obviously, you attend Star Trek Las Vegas on a regular basis, and obviously this year was a big change because it was the first year in a good while it hadn't been officially sponsored. This feels like this is a much bigger deal than what is initially being acted on. I know there's some questions. I know Paramount Plus has been kind of struggling on the streaming front too. Is this just is there? Do you think there's more to this than meets the eye, or is it just Paramount not wanting to get into the Star Trek convention business?
Yeah, it's just Paramount and not wanting to promote Star Trek. We have been dealing with this our entire lives, and it's stupid when you compare it to Star Wars or Disney and how well they promote their product. And here we are struggling, trying to get action figures and panels and conventions and something substantial. And it's like pulling teeth. And it's like, we want to give you our money, please. And they keep denying. And I don't know what Creation did to burn that bridge and why they lost it. I don't know if Paramount would be willing to give it back to Creation and have STLV be the official largest convention. It still will be. I just wish that Paramount would put their name behind it. It is very disappointing. I was very looking forward to going to Seattle. My brother and my nieces are up there, and I was going to be done with school. And so I was going to fly up there and spend some extra time with my family. I was so looking forward to it. And now it is not. But I will be with Thad on the only official on the cruise next year.
Now, Kevin, Reed Pop I know isn't exactly popular in the convention circles. They haven't. I've heard many criticisms even from Star Wars fans and some other things involving Reed Pop. Do you think any of this might be to do with just the fact we're still haven't adjusted to a world post-COVID for some of this stuff, or is it just?
I think maybe
Star Trek getting no respect.
I think the first Reed Pop convention I ever attended was Mission Chicago, and it was a small to medium-sized convention in a very, very large space. It was a very strange convention in that the main con floor had these gigantic swaths of wide open spaces with no vendors or booths or anything, just a big empty room. And plus, I did hear grumblings while I was there that the sort of events that Reed Pop was putting on during the convention weren't really tailored to. They're used to doing Star Wars conventions, and while it sounds very similar, they are quite different. And I think people were looking for more science-based panels and more panels about merchandise and other media besides just the television series, and they weren't giving us that. So there were some complaints about Reed Pop's organization of the convention. I loved Las Vegas. It's a great convention, but I was excited that the convention was going to move around and that I would get to see new cities every time. And I was really excited to go to Seattle because it's a place I've never been. So I'm really disappointed that this convention has been canceled.
Yeah, I know for me, I've been wanting to get back out into the convention circuit, and it's just been hard because they like to schedule these things when I have my busiest time at work. It feels like half the time. But I think 2023 is going to be very interesting in the aspect of I really think we're looking at some major shakeups with Paramount Plus, whether it has a drastic change or it merges with something else. Because when you look at the streaming wars, you have Paramount Plus kind of down here compared to like a Netflix, a Hulu, a Disney Plus, and there's a few others. And there's been some rumors floating around, but these mergers have a lot of people and a lot of wheels turning to it. But I think in 2023, something's going to shake up, and I'll be curious to see what that means for Star Trek conventions going forward. If there is some drastic change with Paramount, and maybe how things get licensed out. So I'm hoping we get a return to some officially licensed Star Trek conventions, because I know one of the things that I've heard from everybody who's ever attended a Star Trek convention, one of the best things about it is being with the cast members, and the cast members are so wonderful during these Star Trek conventions. So I'm hoping it returns. Seattle's a great city, so I hope they get another shot at it as well. But I appreciate everybody kind of giving me an update here of what's going on and giving the listeners an update. But you know what, guys, we've got some away missions to attend to, so let's teleport into away mission 1. Okay, it is time to talk some Star Trek Prodigy. We are back. The last episode, we covered the return of Prodigy with episodes 11 and 12. It's a lot of fun. Prodigy is a show that has greatly surprised me. I was very excited for the animation quality of it, but the story quality has been outstanding. And we're going to start with episode 13, All the World's a Stage, which aired on November 10th. But guys, this episode was a ton of fun if you were a fan of the original series. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, will you take us into our Starflight mission log this week, Amy?
Yes. We'll see how many things I can mispronounce. Admiral Janeway tries to coax more information from the still weak and delirious diviner. The Protostar crew resolves to avoid Starfleet for the time being and responds to a distress call from an M-class planet. Murph comes down with an illness, which Rock cannot determine. After beaming down, the crew comes across an alien race who religiously revere Starfleet and name themselves the Presans. Is that right? Presans?
Presans. Yeah, the end of Presans.
And leads the Protostar crew to their village. After some time, the crew discover that a mysterious disease is afflicting the villagers, which also infects Dal. They track the disease to its source inside a cave, which turns out to be a downed Federation shuttlecraft that is leaking plasma and poisoning the environment. The crew and villagers work together to dispose of the shuttlecraft and seal the cave while Zero devises a cure. As the Protostar crew work with the villagers to revitalize their society, Rock discovers that Murph has turned into a cocoon.
Guys, this is one of the most fun episodes of Prodigy I've had since the show started. They dove deep into the playbook for things. What can we pull from the original series? Let's have a little fun here. What I want is to get your first reactions. What were you feeling after you watched this episode for the first time? What stood out for you? Kevin, I'm going to start with you on this. Give me your first reactions to this episode of Star Trek Prodigy.
Oh, I thought this was great fun. It was fun to hear all the names of our familiar TOS crews, how they'd been passed down generationally to these people and been corrupted. It was fun seeing how they sort of revered these people, even though they really had only ever contacted the one guy, their ensign Garavik. I just thought it was great fun, and I liked that the sort of message of the episode was that you don't have to be in Starfleet to be Starfleet, right? That was the lesson that Dal had to learn, that he didn't have to be officially a part of the organization to reflect their morals and values.
Thad, this has been a time of a lot of tribute to the original series when you have Strange New Worlds and its ties in here. This episode, I thought, if you're going to give it something to kids to maybe kind of start getting them familiar with the original series, this episode is a great doorway into this, and so much fun.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. This episode is clearly a love letter to TOS. We talked about Mission Chicago briefly. At the panel about Prodigy at Mission Chicago, they told us that we would be seeing Ensign Garovic. And I was incredibly confused and really curious what the heck they were going to be doing for that. I remember looking, like sitting in the audience there, pulling out my phone and looking up Memory Alpha to make sure I knew who Ensign Garovic was. Like, isn't that the guy from Obsession? Like, what? And yeah, it was. And they... I never would have expected this way to do it, but they pulled it off so well. This episode, written by Aaron Waltke, was just a fantastic episode of Star Trek, and just a clear... well, I forgot exactly what I was going to say, but like I said before, it's a love letter to TOS.
Yeah, it was. Amy, I know you. I'm watching this episode, and I'm looking, thinking to myself, I have you see you smile on my face. I'm like, Amy's got to have a smile a mile wide on this episode. Or were you a little bit? Are you going to surprise me, Amy?
Yeah, I'm going to be the one dissent voice here. So my first reaction, and this just being honest, listeners, I'm looking at it and going, am I watching Lower Decks? I couldn't understand. Is this a joke? And I'm like, no, Prodigy isn't funny like Lower Decks. This isn't funny. What's going on? I was so confused because I was like, I thought it was supposed to be funny, but it's not. I don't know. I was so confused. I didn't know what was going on. And then I kept thinking, is the internet not working? Because why are they saying these words wrong? Enzon, Starflight. Like, I didn't understand what was going on. I was so confused the whole time. I didn't like it the first time around. That was my initial thought. But I did rewatch, and now I do really, really like it.
So for me, when I watched this episode, the one thing, there's a couple of things that really stood out for me. Obviously, all the ties to TOS, which I think, again, as I said, is a great gateway to get younger kids to maybe want to watch some TOS and learn the story if they're interested in what they saw here and had a good time with this. But I also, what I liked about this was to the impact this episode actually has on the crew of the Protostar, because here they're kind of feeling like, okay, we can't be part of Starfleet now, so we're just flaws too, especially Dahl. It's really hitting him. And I think the great thing about this episode was that message of, you don't necessarily have to be in Starfleet to be Starfleet. And I think that was a really important message, and I really think that was something that really brought the crew even more together. And that's something I've noticed in these first few episodes. They're really trying to get the crew united. They were a bunch of individuals when we left, when we had the break in this first season, and they're really starting to feel like they are coming together as a crew. And I think this was a great way to continue that, while they also learn their own history of Starfleet as they go along as well. Amy?
Well, continuing on with that, like, that's exactly what this show is doing, and it's starting micro and getting macro. So we now finally, the crew is together and they're united and they belong together and their family and their Starfleet. And so now we have this little ship, this little microorganism going around, and it's getting larger and larger. And now we're coming across this world who isn't quite Starfleet, but we are going to accept them. They are now in our family. And so I love that it's going micro to macro. It's great.
Yeah, I really am enjoying it. Kevin and Thad, since I have you here, one of the things I would like to ask you guys, we've talked about this immensely on this. In fact, it was fun last week when Amy realized that Daveed Diggs has joined the cast of Prodigy. That was, I promise you, there was a mile-wide smile on her face when she figured that one out. But guys, what have you thought of the cast? Because I think the cast has been phenomenal. Of course, I'm a huge John Noble fan. You can't ever go wrong when you throw John Noble into something. But Thad, what have you thought of the cast so far in Prodigy with these voice actors?
Well, I really want Daveed Diggs at some point, something important to happen when Daveed Diggs is in another room, so he can walk in and say, "What did I miss?" But the cast is amazing. I've enjoyed everyone in the cast. John Noble, obviously, just a fantastic actor. And the new additions to the cast are great. I will say Jason Alexander is doing an excellent job of hiding his voice, because if I did not know that was Jason Alexander, I would have no idea.
Exactly. Kevin, what about you?
Yeah, I just looked at the cast list here, and I didn't realize that the young Trill ensign is played by Jamila Jamil. That just surprised me. I didn't recognize her voice either. I love this cast. I think they are fun, and I the one, when the original cast was announced, the one that stood out for me was Jason Mantzoukas. He's got a very distinct voice, but it works for Jankum Pog, and I love Jankum Pog. The more I get to know Jankum Pog, the more I want to be friends with Jankum Pog. I love a little guy who fights bigger than his size, right? And that's what Jankum is. So I think that's really fun. It's a great cast. A really great cast. And then of course you've also got some big guys who are big in the animation world, like D. Bradley Baker, who's the voice of Murph, and any other sort of guest characters that'll show up. You can't fault the cast. Now, I will say, if we're going to nitpick, I don't think the animation on Prodigy is up to the level of some other CG animated shows, but I don't care because the stories are great. If I put this side against like an episode of Star Wars Bad Batch, the animation level on that show is higher than on Prodigy. But again, it might be because it's being aimed at a different audience. The budgets might not be as high, but the story quality doesn't suffer from what I think is a slightly lower class of animation.
And I will say personally, for me too, the opening credit sequence for Prodigy is
it's gorgeous.
And you add in that wonderful music, and it's everything is just perfect on that. But guys, I want to kind of get into some of the points and trivia that came out of this episode too, because there was a lot of things obviously with the tie into it. But one of the things we've got is the closest thing we got: down 3 crew and unable to operate every necessary system with Zero's help alone. Dow brings up a group of Enterprisians to run the Protostar, since they have at least some second-hand experience in the matter. Janeway helps things along by loading 23rd century holographic consoles so they'll have familiar interfaces. This was awesome. I'm not even gonna lie. This was awesome, Amy. I was like, oh, can we do this on every starship? Is this something that?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I like that, she told us, all right, so we're going to connect these controls to the Protostar's functioning. So it's not just a hologram, it's actually going to work. And I loved their faces of the Enterprisians when they're like, I don't know what to do. What do I push? And then Janeway saves the day. And then they're like, we can do this, and it was all in how they were drawn. And it came across perfect. I really did like that point. That was the aha moment.
Yeah, guys, one of the things that was really cool about this too, that not when Janeway does this, they get down to the little details with this holograph. It's not just, oh, here's the controls. That they get into all the details here. That had to be some painstaking animation.
Oh yeah, no, they look just like the controls from the original Enterprise. And we talked a little bit about this on Infinite Diversity. Initially, when this happened, I thought, well, even though they know what they look like, I still had a little trouble with the fact that the Enterprisians actually knew how to operate the controls, because it's not like they had ever been on the actual Enterprise. But what we figured probably must have happened, and for the same reason why they were able to imitate voices and stuff like that, is they probably at one time had a bunch of training material and logs and whatever that Ensign Garavik was able to give them, that they were to look over and do and build everything out. And then, they don't have that anymore or whatever because it degraded or whatever. But that's probably what happened, because that's the only way they know how to use those controls.
I was just thinking it was a Galaxy Quest, Well, I pretend to fly it, so I'll pretend to push these buttons and hopefully it'll work.
I just felt like it was maybe a video game microtransaction, Kevin, where, you just buy that skin and put it right over your control console.
It does remind me of the original series episode, A Piece of the Action, a little bit too, where some tech is left behind and what happens to the civilization after that. And in this case, it's a Starfleet shuttlecraft and an ensign, and this is what comes of it. And I think what comes of it is good.
Now, guys, let's talk about too another major tie-in was Ensign Garavik, who was very much hidden to be the same one from Obsession. He was originally the only minor red shirt to return from a mission alive, and then he turns out to become a god to this entire race here. As kind of ironic that a red shirt breaks the Prime Directive and changes it, but that's kind of a page from Lower Decks here, feeling like let's find something really obscure that we can really tie into this. And I thought it was genius how they did it, Kevin.
Oh, I agree, and I think we have to chalk that up to our friend Aaron Waltke. He knows his stuff. We had him on Galaxy Class back about a year ago, and then we even talking to him then, we knew that this guy knew his Trek and knew the minutia of Trek, and that was going to become very evident in his stories. I mean, he also wrote the episode last year where Dahl went on to the holodeck and met Crusher and Spock and Uhura, right? So, and Odo. That was a Walkie episode. So he loves to take characters from previous series and insert them into Prodigy.
Thad, I mean, I love the fact that at least on the Star Trek animated side, they're really diving into these histories of Star Trek and these more obscure things, and I'm so happy seeing Prodigy do it.
Oh, absolutely. I love one of my favorite things as a lifelong Star Trek fan who has seen all of Star Trek, too many times to really, count or, admit in polite company. Polite company is the wrong word, but like in like non-Trekkie company. And it's lovely for me to see anytime there's an Easter egg that references something else. I'm always like, oh, that's great. So of course we get this in the animated shows. We get this in Lower Decks constantly, like every 2 seconds. And in Prodigy, it's amazing to see them doing all these little references because they don't have to do that. For Prodigy especially, I mean, they could have just as easily made this a kid's show and occasionally referenced something from Star Trek, and it would have been fine. But they're going deep, and I love them for it.
So can I ask a question about that, Thad, for what you said? Like, I agree. I was very curious on wondering, is Prodigy going to have this major fan service like Lower Decks? And it fits in perfectly. Lower Decks, perfect. So this one, I do major genius points for getting it done, but does it take it away from this being a brand new introduction that we're putting in this deep fan service to people who don't really know or care or see the importance of it?
I don't think so. I view it sort of in the same way that, take Sesame Street, for instance. Sesame Street is a show for children, obviously. But they also have a lot of references there that are clearly for the parents who are watching it with their kids that go right over the kids' heads. And I think you're going to get some of that here with Prodigy. I do think, at least currently, with it mostly just being available on Paramount Plus, it's most of the kids who are watching this are going to be kids whose parents are Trekkies and are sitting them down and watching it with them anyway. As it airs more on Nickelodeon, we might get more kids watching it on their own. But I think the important thing is that I think a kid could watch this without having any Trek knowledge, and it would be fine. But the way I view this show at the moment, at least, is that it really does seem to be written for adults to show children and be like, hey, look at this. And then, oh, did you like that? Well, maybe we can watch some of this and that sort of thing. So in a way, I think it's there to make the kids curious to find out more about these things that are only glossed on in Prodigy. But I don't think it's necessarily required that they know all of that going in. I think they would still enjoy the story even if they have no idea that William Shatner speaks like this.
Let's get into that, because that was one of the things that I actually really liked. I know, Amy, it threw you off the first time you watched it, but I liked the fact there was a little bit of loss in translation with this alien race, because they were really learning from the videos that they received from the ensign and some of the histories they they had, and how they've just taken the star flight culture, shall we say, and made it in a way their own religion in an aspect, which is actually a pretty powerful thing. But to do it in this fun way where they're naming themselves after the crew of the Enterprise, and but you have just this, these little things that are just a twist because it's a lost in translation thing. I think I know it threw you off at the first, Amy, but when you went and did your rewatch, did you get you said you got a little bit better feeling of what was going on with it, and did you find yourself enjoying it more and going, okay, now it makes a little more sense, it's clicking with me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was understanding what they were doing. And again, like Kevin, what you were saying at the beginning, that generational after generational and that drift, that it happens naturally. And it makes sense being completely out of touch. And it's like the game of telephone, and what happens at the end, it doesn't look like the beginning, but yet they were still able to maintain the ideals of Starfleet, of helping others and being better.
Yeah. Kevin, I think one of the things too is I can, watching this episode, I'm sitting back, I'm thinking there's so many Star Trek fans who are just laughing watching this episode because of what they did, especially with the one talking, like doing kind of the Shatner riff and things like that. And then just all the little things, just how they got the things wrong, but how it makes you laugh. That's highly illogical instead of logical, or the Spock things, everything with Uhura, and it was a great way to pay tribute to the cast. But you could tell that even just in the voice acting work alone, you got a feeling there's a lot of outtakes I would really want to see from this episode, Kevin.
Oh, I bet there are. Now I know that they record individually and they're never in the room together when they record, but I bet that those guys, because the guys who were doing those voices are very talented voice actors who've been doing this a long time. I'm sure that they've left some really great stuff on the cutting room floor. Maybe there'll be a DVD release with some alternate audio tracks. That'd be fun.
Thad, is it just me, or do misplaced shuttlecraft cause a lot of havoc in the Star Trek universe?
Yes, for sure. Also, you do kind of have to wonder where this shuttle Galileo came from, because we know that the shuttle Galileo kind of blows up in another episode of Star Trek, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, and like the Galileo doesn't have exactly a great history in the Star Trek realm, but yeah, I mean, it's again, it's one of these things. It's like Starfleet needs a little GPS tracking on their shuttlecraft, apparently. Something. But another thing I want to get into with this episode too, guys, and we haven't really addressed this. Amy and I had this conversation a little bit on last week's episode, where it almost feels like, in a way, they're writing Admiral Janeway as a little bit of the bad guy here in a kind of roundabout sense, and that she's getting so obsessed and she's losing her perspective. And in this episode, we were starting to see that even more and more. I mean, she's so focused on finding Chakotay and what happened to Chakotay, and just buying completely into the diviner's story without questioning it at all. And that's, to me, that's not something that is a Janeway persona. Yet we got this holographic Janeway who we absolutely love, and it's just such a great mentor to this crew. I was kind of curious of both Thad and you and Kevin, your position on the two sides of the Janeway coin that we're kind of having here in Prodigy. Thad, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, first off, I do want to actually touch on something that you mentioned just there. You said she's buying into the diviner's story. I don't actually think the diviner is telling a story at the moment. I think the diviner knows as much as he's saying, because when we see the diviner, we see those flashbacks and him like piecing things together. I honestly don't think the diviner remembers his evil plans, for lack of a better term. So I don't think it's necessarily a narrative at this point. I think he's telling her exactly what he knows. That said, yes, Janeway is definitely, and I think just for the sake of telling a story, Janeway is currently of the belief that our heroes are ne'er-do-wells who have absconded with the protostar and done who knows what with Chakotay. But given the evidence, why wouldn't she think that? So we have to look at it from her perspective. I don't necessarily think that she's doing anything wrong. I think she's doing exactly what Janeway would do in that situation, given what she knows. Hopefully, once she learns more information, then things will be different. But at the moment, based on everything she knows, these kids are up to no good. She doesn't even know they're kids yet.
Yeah, it's just, is it just me, Kevin, or does seeing Janeway this obsessive feel a little bit off for the character? Especially one of the things Amy and I talked about too, was the fact that she really had no desire to go back out into space after what happened with Voyager, and yet here she is because she's trying to find Chakotay. So are her emotions really affecting some of her decision making here?
I believe so. I get the impression that the Janeway Chakotay relationship became deeper and more intimate since the end of this Voyager series, and that Chakotay is very, very, very important to her. And so the quest to find him has become like her white whale. Like, she has to do this. And I really want to say more, but we need to talk about that when we talk about episode 14.
And that is an absolutely wonderful point. Amy, I wanted to just ask you real quick. Did you notice anything more with Janeway and Admiral Janeway in this episode where you could really see what, continuing on our discussion from our prior episode of Union Federation?
Yeah, I agree with Thad. Then I hadn't really considered the diviner, that he, lost his memory and is trying to gain it back and is saying what he knows. I think, though, once he does figure things out, and we'll talk about it next episode, when he remembers Gwen's name, that was, oh my gosh, yeah, that's the name. He literally didn't even know his daughter, air quote. So Janeway is getting the most information that she can, and I think she is going about it the right way. But I also agree with you, Kevin. This is her well here, and she's gonna have this moment. Is she gonna, pull a Picard and a line must be drawn here and no further, because he's going after the well? I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see which way Janeway ends up and when she realizes the truth.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. And speaking of that, I think we're starting off on that path, and we're going to get into more of that in just a minute when we go to away mission number 2. But first, we're going to take a quick break and let you know what else is happening around the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Network.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our Fandom Flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And we're back, and we hope you're enjoying everything that's happening on the BQN as well as the Fandom Podcast Network. But it's time to continue our away mission. We are up for away mission number 2. Even though I'm continuing to be assimilated by the BQN, I think we can get through this episode. We're going to be talking about episode 14, Crossroads. The episode aired on November 17th of 2022. Amy, would you care to give us that episode mission log?
Yes, on the USS Dauntless, as the diviner is being helped back to his bed by Ensign Essentia, he suddenly remembers his daughter's name, Gwendala. The USS Protostar crew travels to an ice planet where they hope to find transport to Starfleet. After burying the Protostar so it can't be used against Starfleet, the crew hikes to a nearby Denoxy depot where they encounter a man who introduces himself as Okana. Okana offers to give the group transport in exchange for some deuterium. Unfortunately, he is suddenly approached by a Xindi reptilian security team who accuse him of smuggling. What? Okana? That doesn't sound right. At the outpost, the crew separates, hoping to find Starfleet. Gwen is saved from an encounter from an aggressive Klingon by Ensign Essentia, who realizes that Gwen must be the diviner's daughter. When the ensign mentions that Gwen's father is aboard the Dauntless, Gwen is spooked and runs off. Pog comes face to face with Dr. Naum. The pair trade insults, but Pog is caught off guard when Naum disdainfully says that Pog is a name reserved for runts. Meanwhile, Dahl is intimidated when he comes face to face with Admiral Janeway. Suddenly, he spots Baroness Frex being led to the Admiral and runs off before Frex can recognize him. While hiding, Dahl overhears Frex describe the fierce marauders who destroyed the station and overhears the Admiral's vow to catch them. Realizing that she intends to arrest them, and concerned that Starfleet might discover the Protostar and accidentally activate the living construct weapon, Dahl finds the others, and they speed away on a speeder, hoping to unearth the Protostar and escape. They soon find Okana, who is stowed away on their speeder, hoping to evade security. When Okana suggests that he can help them evade the authorities, they let him accompany them. The Protostar takes off with the Dauntless in pursuit. As Zero does their best to evade them, Murph hatches and accidentally fires the torpedoes when he sits on a console. Believing they've been deliberately fired upon, Janeway orders the Dauntless to return fire, careful to disable the ship but not destroy it. To escape the Dauntless, Dahl orders Pog to initialize the proto-drive. Discovering that they're near the Romulan neutral zone, Okona suggests that they cross over since no Starfleet vessel would follow them in, and he can remodulate their shields so that the Romulans won't detect them. Against hologram Janeway's advice, Dahl has the ship enter the Romulan neutral zone. When Janeway seems prepared to follow them in, Commander Tysus refuses to obey her order, warning that she is letting her emotions, specifically her desire to find Chakotay, dictate her actions, which could lead to war. Before the Admiral can decide whether to heed her first officer's advice or not, the Dauntless is greeted by a Dedrelix-class Warburg and are held by its commander, Kaseth, who warns her not to cross into the neutral zone.
Okay, guys, there was a ton in a very short episode of Star Trek Prodigy, but wow, this one has definitely taken the show up to another level, in my opinion. However, I've got to say this before we go any farther. Freck's next destination assignment needs to be Starbase 80. I'm just saying. I can't think of anything better for him, but there's so much going on in this episode and so much story advancement. So I'm just going to dive right into it. And I'm going to start with you ladies first. What was your first reactions to this episode?
Okay, cheering when I saw Okana. Absolutely 100%. I was like stopping. I was telling my brother, I'm like, do you know who that is? Okana. And I made him, it was so much fun. and he's still as handsome as ever. I was really involved with this episode because there's so much, which way could it go? And it's so frustrating when just a simple communication would straighten everything out. But of course, we're not going to do that. But the, hiding and the running away, and then, it just was a great episode, but I do have some questions that I will wait to at the end.
Okay. Kevin, your thoughts on the episode?
I loved this episode. I just thought it was so much fun. And it does remind me of those sitcom episodes where if somebody just said something to somebody else, the whole problem would go away. But these are kids, and they're nervous when, and they're not just kids, they're fugitive kids. They're kids who had been incarcerated and imprisoned and are tasting freedom for the first time, and they don't want to go back to that. So when they encounter an authority figure like Admiral Janeway and learn that she's hunting them, I'd probably run too if I were them. So their misunderstanding it's an understandable misunderstanding, but if Dal had just told her what she needed to know, the rest of the season probably would have been cleared up right away. But instead, it's going to lead to some fun chase adventures, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Thad, your thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I think Rock Talk summed it up pretty well when she said, "You mean you all talked to Starfleet and none of you told them about the weapon?" Yeah. There were plenty of opportunities for things not to have gone the way they did, but for the case of storytelling, we needed it to happen this way. So, and we're definitely seeing the we talked a little bit about how Janeway is definitely taken this a little personally and is looking at the people on the protostar with a very dim view, and I think that's definitely continuing here. But in her defense, they did in fact fire on her, so there was that.
So for me with this episode, there's a lot of things going on, but I think Kevin hit a great point. That's something I threw out with this episode. They're kids. They're scared. They hear the name Diviner, who basically almost killed them. They're like, "No, we're getting out of Dodge here. This is not for us." And let's kind of be honest here. Janeway and her crew weren't exactly acting the most friendly either. This was not a typical, I would say, reaction for a Starfleet crew in this kind of situation, especially once Janeway realizes that they are kids. And you would think her view would change, but it still doesn't. And I think that's a very interesting turn. But there's so many things going on. And the fact now that we've got the Romulans and the neutral zone involved and the end on kind of this cliffhanger that this episode ended on, I really feel like Prodigy kind of took a step. This was a level up episode for Prodigy. This brought Prodigy up to another level that I think is going to be very interesting to see how it develops. But Amy, there is one thing I need to address, because we do get the morphomorphosis fully in this episode. And I got to say, I'm thinking if he were here, I don't know if a Mr. Reitzel would necessarily be happy about what the morphomorphosis changed into.
Why?
I think he loves cute, cuddly glob Murph. I don't know if he wants this little, like, whatever this arms and legs version of Murph is.
It's like a gingerbread man.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't know, since I'm talking about this, Kevin, did you think that the morphomorphosis might have been a bigger thing than what they kind of played it out to be, or do you think there's more to come to that? Because it seems like it was a big part of this next group of episodes.
Yeah, I don't think we have seen the end of the morphomorphosis. I think I don't know. We don't know if he has evolved into this humanoid creature because he's around other humanoid creatures, or if that's typical for his species. Because weren't we told that he was some kind of slime worm?
Yeah.
So Yeah, I don't think we've
Ooh.
seen the end of the Murphamorphosis.
I like that he's taking on the appearance of where he's at. Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thad, what about you? Some thoughts on the Murphamorphosis here?
So first off, why are we saying Murphamorphosis when metamorphosis is right there?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Secondly, yeah, I think this is a transitory version of Murph. I think he will probably evolve yet again to something else after that. And I'm suspecting that he is going to probably, by the end of the season, be actually talking and not just making noise.
Yeah, I would suspect that the continuation as he evolves and continues, he will definitely become more advanced in things. But guys, let's talk. I want to talk about the cast real quick here before we get into a lot of the more deeper points of the episode, because I thought of you, Amy, because of who was voicing one Okana, one Mr. Billy Campbell, the Rocketeer himself.
Oh, let's see. I don't know him from that. Billy Campbell. I know him from what's the crime show? I love him.
Yeah, so he's done so much. He was in The Killing. He was
Oh yeah, The Killing. That was good.
He was in the 4400. He was on the OC. He was on Once and Again. More
Are you
Tales
thinking
from
of Crime Story, Amy?
No.
Moon Over Miami. Tales of the City. He's been in, but Crime Story from 86 to 88 was that. He actually was on Dynasty for a while too. But I think most fans know him from The Rocketeer. But a show I actually really liked was the 4400 when he was on that as well. But yeah, I saw Billy Campbell voice and it's like, yeah, Amy's in a happy place right now.
Yes. I didn't know that was him. So I'm smiling nice and big. Very good.
I think it's great casting. I think he's going to be. I got to ask you guys this too with Okana. I think he's sticking around for a while. I think he's going to become part of this crew at least for a little bit for the next several episodes. What do you guys think? And what did you think of him bringing him into this episode, Kevin?
Oh, he's a fun character. Always has been a fun character. I would have liked to have seen more of him back when in his younger dashing days. I'd like to know the story of how he lost his eye. I think that would be a fun story to tell. That's some continuity holes that some novelists can write about somewhere now. And I think what's going to be fun is to watch him butt heads with hologram Janeway, because we know that's coming, right?
Bad.
I hope that he tells the story of how he lost his eye to the kids as a sort of cautionary tale or something like that. I think that would be cool. I think he is probably going to stick around for a little while. I definitely get the impression that he's going to be with them and he's going to sort of take them under his wing a bit. So that could be fun.
Amy, we saw you. We heard your excitement when you did the mission log of this. Interestingly enough, the last time we saw Okano was in Lower Decks.
Yeah, so Okana's making his way around these new TV shows. That's pretty impressive. I mean, just think was that a season 3? 2?
I believe season 3.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome.
It was the episode An Embarrassment of Duplers.
Yeah.
So
can I ask, how do you feel about seeing like the reptilians, the Zindi, and these Romulans, and the who else was on there?
Kazon.
Yeah, the Kazon. And are you liking that? Because I really liked it. I'm glad that they didn't give us some new species, because I like where we get to build our universe. And it's like, yes, they still are here. That's great. I really enjoyed seeing the species there on the planet.
Thad, I'll let you kind of answer
I
and
love
give your
that.
first thoughts to this here.
Yeah, it was. It's a trading post, so you're gonna get all kinds of people, and we're getting to see all different people from different Star Trek races. I will say this is the first Klingon we've seen since Discovery season 2, so that was exciting. They've sort of been, I think, deliberately downplaying Klingons since then, because there had been some backlash about the way Klingons looked in Discovery from some fans, and they're just sort of trying to. So that's why we saw a Klingon that looks like they did in TNG, which is also how we're going to see Worf in Picard next season. But it was cool to see a Klingon. It was really cool to see Xindi. First time we've seen Xindi since Enterprise season 3. So that was cool. My only real concern here, and I feel like I'm probably just nitpicking for nitpicking's sake here, but there's a Kazon there. Kazon, as we know, are from the Delta Quadrant, from really far away. It seems unlikely there would be a Kazon at a trading post that's close enough to the Romulan neutral zone for them to just fly there. Like, I want to know that Kazon story. Give me the short trek of how that Kazon came the whole way across the galaxy.
Kevin, what about you? How are you feeling bringing in all these different races? It feels like they're when we talked about this even with the last episode, they're bringing a little bit more Star Trek into this. Kind of, it feels like, it's like, hey, we're gonna start feeding you bits, so you have some things to research and learn about here a little bit as well.
I feel it makes the universe feel a little more fleshed out, more vibrant. Like, we know as longtime fans that these races are out there, and the fact that they are sharing them with this younger generation is great. I love the fact that Admiral Janeway's crew doesn't have a single human in it. It's a Trill, an Andorian, and a Tellarray, right? So, it's fun. It's fun to see these aliens, and they can do it in animation because you don't have to spend hours putting people in latex masks or making puppets or doing anything weird that costs lots of money. It costs the same amount of money to animate an Andorian captain as it does to animate a blob like Murph. So they can make the universe feel more varied and interesting, and it's not costing them any more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, those are all great points. One of the other things I really liked about this episode was the meeting of the crews. As we're starting to bring some of that together. First of all, I give the crew of the Protostar a lot of props for actually coming up with the idea that we need to move on without the ship for a while. We can't risk exposing Starfleet to this, and how they made their decision to leave the Protostar there, put it in sleep mode, and try to continue on. Well, obviously backfired pretty rapidly, but actually some good thinking from the crew. Again, Amy, I go back to Janeway's crew is kind of a bunch of asses, at least in this episode. None of them, except maybe the ensign, seem like they're people I want to be spending some time with. And I think what I did notice, so that's something that I found at least a little interesting, was we got a little bit of the old Janeway there when she realized that they were children there for a moment. But then again, she got so obsessed with just hunting them down that she lost that. But we got, you feel like we got that flash of with Admiral Janeway, of the original Janeway, when she looks it down and goes, "You didn't tell me they were kids." But
yeah,
I think it's an interesting dynamic they're starting to develop between these two crews.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like that in this episode, we really see that she's working in the dark. She really has nothing to go on except what the diviner has says, and now what this Frax guy has says. And so when she sees a kid, it's like, oh, you want to join Starfleet? Like, that's your initial, we're at some job fair, Starfleet fair, like at Lower Decks, and someone's approaching her. How can I join Starfleet? And why would she even think that this kid is going to have any answers to what she's looking for, And so I would do the same thing. I mean, if I had some kid come and approach me, oh yeah, you need some help with some math. I wouldn't think that they would be trying to help me solve the universe's problems, So it is a nice dichotomy, and how Dahl approaches, Janeway, and then we've got Pog and the Doctor, and Gwen and that person. So those pairings are really fun and interesting, and I think really kept this episode fresh also.
Yeah. Kevin, do you feel like because we're starting to get these meetings too, that we are kind of like getting ready to take the next major step in the Prodigy storyline here?
Oh, for sure. We are waist deep in the plot of Prodigy now. The next step, in my mind, the next step is for the kids to come up with a way to contact Starfleet that doesn't involve using the Protostar's systems. So if they can do that, then they're on the right track. In my mind, that seems to be the next logical step. I want to get back to a comment about Janeway's crew. I think of all of them, the one who seemed the most Starfleety at this point was Ensign Essentia.
Yeah.
She didn't approach Gwen in any way that she approached Gwen with the information she knew she had. She wasn't angry. She wasn't looking down at Gwen. She thought she recognized her. And she didn't know that Gwen was part of this crew either, right? She just thought that she had found the daughter of the guy who's helping them. So she's Essentia is essentially trying to be that bridge to Gwen. And when Gwen found out that they're working with her father, that's when she ran, because she knows what kind of a monster her father is. And I hope that something clicks in Essentia because of her meeting with Gwen.
I do believe that we will see at some point Essentia on the Protostar helping the crew. Yeah. I think she's going to be one of the characters that kind of ends up becoming that bridge character between the two crews here. But Thad, what about you? What did you think of the interactions here? I thought, because I think they were very interesting, especially I think with Dahl and Janeway, because it was interesting. It's like, because he has so much respect for the holographic Janeway, and then here's the real Janeway in front of him, and it's like, here's this kid who's like seeing somebody he idolizes, but afraid he's going to be in trouble for the actions he's taken and everything like that. And I think in the performance, you got a really honest reaction.
Oh yeah, absolutely, from both of them. And I think we see the character of Janeway. One of the things about Janeway throughout Voyager is that she was a mentor to her crew, and you see that very much in that conversation she has with Dahl, and I love it. I think it's a fantastic interaction. And then even after she finds out that that he's actually who they're looking for, she realizes that it's not quite as cut and dry villainous as she might have thought, because when she turns to Barnes Friction, she said, "You didn't think to tell us they were kids?" So yeah, I think hopefully very soon Janeway is going to realize that these kids are not really the problem, and that there's another issue at play here. But I thought those interactions were great. I love the interaction with Jankum and Dr. Noom. We come again to something that is going to go right over the kids that are watching this for the first time head, other than him just dismissing him. But we as Star Trek fans know that this is Tellarites. They always like to argue and insult each other. So this is a perfect interaction for Dr. Noom is acting as a Tellarite. The problem is Jankum, as an orphan, has not grown up with Tellarites. He doesn't know that this is what Tellarites do. So he's legitimately hurt by this. And I thought that was a very, very well done scene to show us that, because Dr. Noom is just behaving the way he would to any other Tellarite. And a normal Tellarite would just, give as good as they got.
And I actually want to come to you on that point, because I know how you felt about Jacob through the series so far. This is an interesting character development point for Jacob. And now that he's kind of been through this and realizes that, he's thinking, oh, he's royalty and stuff like that. And now he's hearing this from another Telluride. I think it's going to, you've been kind of wanting to see more from Jacob. And I think this is kind of going to be a start of this for him.
Yeah. And I didn't want to see his feelings get hurt, but I am looking forward to seeing how he is going to grow now that he sees other Tellurites. And that is a great point that I didn't even consider that. I love that.
Now, before we get to the chase, guys, I do want to let you know this is a Warp 9 level podcast, so we're good here. But the chase scene, there's a couple of things in this I want to bring to a point. One that really stood out to me was the fact that we see the Diviner recognizing the Protostar. And I think they don't make that scene just for nothing. I think we're going to start seeing the Diviner putting the puzzle pieces of who he is back together, because everything he sees and those memories start flushing back. But I also found it very interesting too, with them accidentally firing the torpedo on Janeway and then Janeway shooting at them. It kind of felt to me, Amy, like, okay, this is the adult trying to help the kid, but on the other hand, the kid is starting to get really annoying, and she's gonna like, okay, I gotta put this kid in his place too. And then you add in the aspect of the neutral zone and all this, and then we see Janeway kind of converting back to this what happened to Chakotay thing. It's really interesting to watch all these different sides of Janeway, the Admiral Janeway, conflict, while yet on the other hand, now we have Captain Janeway realizing she's being chased by the real Janeway, and she's like, oh, just the facepalm aspect of it.
Yeah, I am hoping that hologram Janeway will somehow talk to Admiral Janeway. I'd like to sort of see that. Because she's going to help the kids, explain themselves. So I think she might be able to fill in some pieces. And I really do have to laugh at Murph sitting on the console and pushing the buttons. Okay, how many times has Riker done that on TNG? Has leaned over to talk to Worf. Hey, let me sit my butt down here, and nothing ever happens. And yet here Murph does it, this gelatinous person, and it fires. That made me laugh. I had to laugh.
Come on, at this point, you would think Star Trek technology would have found some way to cancel out the butt dial. That's all I'm saying. Kevin, you were having some excitement there when
I just had a flash, and I'm wondering if maybe the way the two ships can end up communicating is if hologram Janeway can somehow be sent to the Dauntless. But
that would be interesting. I have to figure if they can figure out a way to do that, because she is technically part of the ship's systems. So it'd be like healing them. And so I'm really curious. I think this is one of the most interesting subplots here, Thad, is how is the Protostar going to communicate with Janeway? Because at this point, I got to think Janeway is just so blind with rage, and we even have her own crew correcting her now, but she's frustrated. And now these kids are kind of almost outsmarting her. And then to bring in the Romulans in the neutral zone in all this, I didn't see that coming at all. I was like, wow, okay. Wasn't expecting that one.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm not sure how they're going to. I like the idea of somehow using hologram Janeway. I think that's a cool idea. The other thing I'm thinking they could do is somehow get some sort of neutral third party to tell Janeway about it. I'm not sure who that would be, other than possibly the hologram. But I think that's going to have to be the way that it gets figured out. I think. Yeah, I very much had not even considered real Janeway and hologram Janeway interacting with each other, but now I need that. So thanks for letting us know, giving us that idea, Amy. That's great. And what Kevin was saying there, that might be how they communicate. That is a way to do it. I mean, we haven't seen hologram Janeway leave the ship yet, but we know that holograms can, because in Voyager, the Doctor was sent via transmission to a couple different places, but I think sent via transmission have the same issue as hailing. I think that's going to send the weapon. So not sure how well that would work out unless Janeway boards the Protostar somehow, and then she can talk to hologram Janeway.
Sorry. I just want a question. Do we know if the weapon is only designed to attack Federation technology, or will it attack any technology? If the Protostar tries to contact the Romulans, will it infect them and destroy their ship? Do we know this?
I don't think so. I think they've specifically said it only attacks Federation tech.
Okay.
And see here's the interesting thing, and this is what I'm really curious about, because we haven't really seen it entirely yet, is if somebody beams on to the Protostar, does that trigger does the living weapon detect that frequency for that teleporter, and it can infect, or maybe the Delta communicator? Is that enough for it to detect that other? Just how advanced is this weapon? We've seen it with a direct connection, but what about some of these other possible minor connections that could come in? Is the weapon that powerful that it can infect through that? I mean, is it that strong? And that's the impression I get, is that this weapon is so advanced that if the protostar, even if somebody beams onto it or walks onto it with another Delta from another ship, it's going to detect that, and it can use that Delta to even spread the virus to the ship. So I think that's an interesting thing to see how that's going to play out some more. But that's kind of the impression I'm getting.
I also just realized the other thing we need to think about is the person who put the weapon onto the protostar is on the Dauntless.
Yeah.
So if the Dauntless got infected, then the Diviner will be affected as well. And can he stop it?
Yeah. Well, but does the Diviner want to stop it? That would be the other question.
If it would mean the end of his existence.
Right, to save his life
Yeah.
instead of destroying, the Dauntless.
Do we know that he cares about saving his own life? The Diviner's end goal, as explained in the first half of the season, was to save his species, his planet, from annihilation. If he thinks that the virus attacking the Dauntless is going to further that goal, even if it does mean his death, he might be okay with that.
That's true.
And who knows what kind of shape his brain is in at this point, too. So all very interesting things to consider. And I wonder how the Romulans are going to tie into this now, because they're going to say, wait, this is a Federation ship over here, even though they're kind of hiding themselves with the shield, changing the frequencies of the shielding, but still, they're going to see this ship at some point. It's not like this. So there's that. I mean, and who knows what kind of damage is done to the protostar after the torpedo hit it. So there's a lot of interesting things to play out in these next few episodes, but this episode was just absolutely phenomenal, and just so many questions. And I said this before last episode, I'm going to say this again at this point. As far as connective story, Prodigy is writing the most intriguing story of any of the Star Trek shows right now. Obviously, Strange New Worlds is nailed the episodic nature of it, but I just, there's something about the story that Prodigy is weaving that is just so intriguing and so interesting with all the directions it's going, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen here. And I think that's a credit to the writing team. And I think, like I said, I think as far as overarching story, it's the best thing that's been done maybe with this modern iteration of Star Trek. I'm finding it that fascinating. So that's just my personal opinion on it. But guys, we've covered a lot of points here. Amy, do you have another question or thought?
So with that, this sort of is one of the questions I wanted to ask everyone. Again, coming at it, is this a children's show? And after especially this episode and what you're saying with how complex and convoluted is this story, and it's like we're trying to find Chakotay, we've got the Diviner, we've got the kids, and we've got two Janeways, and now they're like, it seems like the story is so complex that if I were a kid, I don't know that I'd be able to keep up with any of it. And I think back, and I said this on Galaxy Class too, I'm like, I remember watching He-Man, and there was some backstory with Skeletor. I never picked up on it because it was too, I guess, difficult for me. And is this really for kids? But now, like, thank that and Kevin coming on saying, well, it's on Paramount. So really, the kids most likely will have had Star Trek parents that will be watching. So I can get on board with that, but I don't like the initial premise of this is a kid's show and then having this major complex story of going this way and that way and chasing and finding and miscommunication. And it seems too much for a kid's show.
I think it's an interesting point. Chad, what do you think? What Amy's saying here?
I mean, I can definitely see where Amy's coming from on that, but at the same time, I don't think it's any more complex than other animated kids shows. Like if we look at the Star Wars shows like Rebels and Bad Batch and all that, I think that's on the same level. If we look at we want to look at other Nickelodeon shows, Avatar: The Last Airbender was certainly as complex as this.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Kevin.
And kids memorize the names of every Pokemon, or they know, back in the 90s, they knew everybody who was on Sailor Moon. I think kids are smarter than a lot of people give them credit for.
I think here, this is, again, I think the brilliance of Prodigy, too, is that it's smart enough to realize we want it to be something for kids and to be a gateway show for Star Trek for kids to get them into Star Trek. But it's smart enough to say we know we need the parents to help bring them into this world, because as they grow up, it's the parents who are going to expose them to more of Star Trek things and talk to them about it. So I think having the basics there that attract kids, whether it's the cute characters, the action of the storyline, things like that, and like Kevin said, we got to give the creators a little bit more credit here. But I think having that complex storyline makes it enjoyable for the parents to watch with the kids instead of the parents just plunking the kids in front of the television and doing something else. It makes it a kind of show where the parents and kids are doing it together as a family. And I think that's the brilliance of it. And I think that's why I think Prodigy is so appealing to so many people across the board. I wouldn't necessarily say I could let my younger kids sit down with me and watch, especially like the first season of Discovery. That's with Prodigy, you have that, and then you can grow it with them. And I think that's what the brilliance of it is. And I think it's one of the things that I really am appreciating about Star Trek right now with its creative process is the diversity of the shows they're doing within their creative process. Not every show is for everybody. And I think it's something that we're starting to see with more and more of these different franchises as well, because I see Star Wars starting to do more of an adult theme show with their Andor show. I see it with what Marvel's been trying to do with some of their shows and movies here recently, where they're not all the same formula. And I think that diversifying your product is something, especially in today's day and age where you have so much competition, you're not relying on, the same formula is going to attract everybody. And I think this diversity is what I'm saying. It's a wonderful thing to have within the world you're building. So there's something there for everybody, instead of just like, no, it's not my cup of tea, but I'm going to go watch this franchise. Instead, that I identify more with, no, wait, I like this aspect of this show, but you know what? But hey, it's getting you to watch and be part of that world. And you never know, there might be something that grabs you and pulls you into it. But that's just kind of my feeling on it, guys. But as we wrap up here, I want to give everybody a chance to kind of get some final thoughts on both of these episodes and what we might see, what you guys think might be in the future for Star Trek Prodigy. Thad, thank you so much, of course, for joining us. Any final thoughts on these two episodes?
Other than I think they're awesome Star Trek and I want more Prodigy. Not really.
Kevin, as well, thank you for being on this episode of Union Federation. Any final thoughts on these episodes or something that you want to see going forward?
No, I loved both these episodes, especially the second episode. I thought I love that this plot is progressing and that we can see the progression of the plot already. I still keep coming back to the question I've had almost since the beginning of Prodigy, and why is the show called Prodigy? Who is the Prodigy? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions that are going on with that. Amy, of course, you're here with me, day show in and show out, and I really think it's been fun watching you both with Lower Decks and Prodigy really get yourself more immersed in these animated shows than I think you had any thought that you were going to, and I'm loving it.
Yeah. Yes, animation has not been my forte, but Star Trek is definitely changing my mind. And I love Lower Decks, and now if you ask me what's my favorite Trek, well, it's Prodigy. It's whatever Trek is currently on. That's my newest favorite because they are so good. It's beautiful, good stories, good characters, and we are really getting nice character development. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things here. But guys, it's time to start wrapping things up. So Before we close out, let's intercept a few subspace signals. Now, of course, you can find the Union Federation in a couple of places. They, of course, on the Fandom Podcast Network. Either it's on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this video, thank you. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share us out. If you're listening to the audio version podcast, you're either listening to it on the master feed of the Fandom Podcast Network, or you're listening to it on one of the many BQN feeds out there. This partnership has been going on for about what now, 6-7 months, Amy, already, and it's going swimmingly. It's, I think we've got just that right amount of assimilation going on. Of course, too, you can find the Union Federation on its Facebook page, where we try to keep you updated on all the goings on, not only with Star Trek, but with the Orville as well. I know Kevin is traveling right now, but part of his travels, Amy, is he's been listening to a certain Orville audiobook that came out, so that we will be covering soon on Union Federation.
Oh, I better get on that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We'll be talking about that soon, but
That's right. Okay.
so, and hopefully we're going to get some news on season 4 of the Orville, whether it's coming back or not, fingers crossed. But there's also some great ways to find everybody on the crew. Of course, my name is Kyle. You can find me on Twitter and as at AKyleW, or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. You can find the Union Federation on Twitter at UnionFedPod, or you can email us at theunionfederation@gmail.com. Amy, where can we find you and all these guys at the BQN? I mean, you guys stay busy. You put out a lot. You've been putting out a lot of material this last few months.
There's a lot of Trek to talk, so yes. Well, I am co-hosting Galaxy Class with Kevin and Joe and Rhea. That's all next gen, sort of my favorite. Also on All Good Things with Mark and Christos, which is a general Star Trek podcast. You can find us there. The BQN Collective is our Facebook group. You can join us there. I am on Twitter still at Miss Amy Nelson. Who knows how long that's going to stay, but you can find me there.
Kevin, where can people find you on the BQN and out there in the social media land?
Yeah, so you can find me on Galaxy Class with Miss Amy Nelson. We have fun over there talking TNG and doing our Batleth battles. I also do a podcast with some other friends that's off the network. It's called True North Nerds. And so you can find me on Twitter at True North Nerds. Find me in the BQN Collective on Facebook too. So that's where I am.
And Thad, where can people find you broadcasting out all these great subspace signals that you do?
Well, you can also find me on BQN on Infinite Diversity with my co-host Chrissy, where we talk about every new episode of Star Trek the Tuesday after it airs. So that seems to be just about every week these days.
Yeah. We actually are going to be looking. What are you guys going to do? We do actually have a little break towards the end of December through January.
Oh, it's going to relax. It's going to be great. But yeah, we always have a lot of fun talking about every new episode of Star Trek. You can also hear me on the independent podcast I do with my friend Carl about James Bond. It's called License to Spiel. That's license spelled with a C, like the British do it, and the Canadians. And the best place to find me at the moment is on Twitter at Tyrannicus. That's Tyranicus. And fingers crossed that Twitter continues to be a thing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be around. I just don't know what it's going to morph into at this point. So, yeah. Real quick, a look into the Orb of Prophecy. Of course, the next episode of Union Federation will be episode 152, where we'll be covering episodes 15 and 16 of Star Trek Prodigy. We know, I believe we will have Mr. Reitzel back. He has been traveling down in the land down under with his lovely wife, Erin. And you can find Kevin on social media at Spartan_Phoenix, both on Twitter and on Instagram. And hopefully soon, our top-notch science officer and weapons expert, Haley Stoddard, is going to finally be able to return to the Union Federation podcast. She's had a little sick bay time. You know, real life happens. And things happen, but I know she's anxious to get back on the airwaves, and you can find her on Twitter at Trekkie01D. Of course, too, Prodigy will continue on through December. Then we're going to get a little break, guys. As I was saying, we don't get Star Trek Picard until February 16th of 2023. And sometime in 2023, we will have Discovery Season 5 and Strange New Worlds Season 2, plus another season of Lower Decks. Amy, I have a feeling if at this point, if we get in Season 4 of Orville, it might not be till 2024. Just gut feeling. Yeah, at this point. But first of all, and finally, I want to thank Thad. I want to thank Kevin. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We love having you guys be part of our crew as well. And of course, Amy, wonderful as always. You know, you keep us in line. You know, you pull some of those teacher tricks on us. Keep us in line. We need a math episode of Star Trek again. I think they owe you one here. Amy,
Okay.
but
yes.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the latest episode of Union Federation. Until next time. Hailing frequencies are now closed.